Hey there, thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoy emotional stories that explore the depths of family secrets, hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. Now let's dive into today's powerful narrative. The sky hung heavy that Tuesday afternoon, a somber ceiling of grey that matched Robert's grief. Standing at the edge of the cemetery, he watched as they lowered Helena's casket into the ground. The white roses that adorned the polished wood seemed almost offensive in their beauty, too vibrant against the backdrop of loss that consumed him. Beside him, Lucas stood rigid, his 14-year-old frame straining with the effort of containing his emotions. The boy's hand gripped Robert's with surprising strength, as though he feared his father might vanish if he loosened his hold. Robert recognized that fear. He'd lived with it himself for 15 years. "Dad," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "Mom wouldn't want everyone looking so sad." Robert squeezed his son's hand. "You're right. She always hated being the center of attention." The words felt hollow in his mouth, inadequate against the roaring silence that Helena had left behind. As friends and distant relatives approached with practiced expressions of sympathy, Robert felt the weight of more than just grief pressing down on him. It was the burden of a secret about a little girl with Helena's eyes and his smile, a child Lucas had never known existed. Clara, their firstborn, who had vanished one autumn afternoon 15 years ago, leaving nothing but unanswered questions and a hole in their lives that never healed. The reception afterward was held at their house, the living room filled with quiet conversations and the clink of coffee cups. Robert moved through it all mechanically, accepting condolences and nodding at appropriate intervals. His mind, however, remained fixed on the wooden box tucked away in his and Helena's closet, the one containing Clara's photographs, drawings, and the small bracelet she'd been wearing the day she disappeared. "Mr. Carter, if there's anything we can do," said Ellen, Helena's colleague from the school where she'd taught. Her hand rested briefly on Robert's arm. Helena was so proud of Lucas. She talked about him all the time. Robert nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you. She was an amazing mother." What he didn't say was how Helena had struggled after Clara disappeared, how there were days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the weight of not knowing consumed her. He didn't mention how they'd made the painful decision to shield Lucas from that history, to give him a childhood unburdened by a ghost he'd never met. That night, after the last guest had left and Lucas had retreated to his room, Robert sat alone in the kitchen. The house seemed to creak with emptiness. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did, and stared at the amber liquid as if it might contain answers. "What would you have me do now, Helena?" he whispered to the empty room. "Keep the promise or tell him everything?" The silence offered no reply, but in his mind he could hear Helena's voice from years ago. "Some pain doesn't need to be passed down, Robert. Some burdens shouldn't be inherited." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like distant applause. The weeks following Helena's funeral fell into a strange rhythm. Robert returned to work at the architectural firm, while Lucas went back to school. They moved around each other cautiously, like dancers learning new steps, both aware of the space Helena no longer occupied. One evening, as Robert prepared dinner, something he'd rarely done when Helena was alive, Lucas appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a photo album. "Found this in the living room bookshelf," he said, his expression curious. "It's you and Mom, but there aren't any pictures of me in it." Robert's hands stilled over the cutting board. The album Lucas held was from before Clara disappeared, before they had carefully curated their family's visual history to erase any trace of their daughter's existence. "Those are from when we first got married," Robert said carefully, reaching out to take the album. "Just boring stuff." Lucas held onto it. "You guys look so happy. Mom's hair was longer. She cut it after—" Robert caught himself. "After a few years. She wanted a change." The truth was, Helena had cut her hair after Clara disappeared. She couldn't bear to look in the mirror and see the woman who had failed to protect her daughter. At least, That's how she had explained it to Robert one night, tears streaming down her face as chunks of her auburn hair fell around her feet. Lucas flipped through a few more pages. "Who's this woman? She's in a lot of these pictures with you and Mom." Robert glanced over and felt his heart skip. It was Sarah, Helena's sister, who had moved abroad after Clara's disappearance. She hadn't been able to handle the grief, the constant reminders. They'd lost touch over the years. "That's your Aunt Sarah, your mother's sister." Lucas looked up, surprised. "I have an aunt? How come I've never met her?" "She lives in Australia now. They had a falling out a long time ago." Another half-truth. Sarah had blamed them, in a way. She'd said they should have watched Clara more carefully that day at the park. The argument that followed had been the final cut in an already fraying relationship. "Do you think we could contact her? Now that Mom's gone, maybe—" "I don't know if that's a good idea, Lucas," Robert interrupted more sharply than he intended. Seeing the hurt on his son's face, he softened his tone. "I mean, it's been a long time. I'm not even sure how to reach her." Lucas closed the album. "It's just, I feel like there's so much I don't know about Mom, about your lives before me." The words struck Robert like a physical blow. There was so much Lucas didn't know, an entire chapter of their family history deliberately kept from him. For a moment, Robert considered sitting his son down right there and telling him everything. About Clara, about the sister he never knew he had, about the investigation that went nowhere, about the years of hoping that slowly transformed into years of acceptance. Instead, he turned back to the vegetables he was cutting. "Your mom and I were pretty boring, honestly. We met in college, got married young. The interesting part of our lives started when you came along." Lucas didn't respond immediately, and when Robert glanced back, he saw his son studying him with an intensity that reminded him painfully of Helena. "You know you can tell me stuff, right, Dad? I'm not a little kid anymore." Robert forced a smile. "I know, buddy. There's just not much to tell." That night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Robert retrieved the wooden box from the closet. He sat on the edge of his bed. Still Helena's side, he couldn't bring himself to sleep there yet, and carefully opened the lid. Inside were the carefully preserved artifacts of Clara's short life. The hospital bracelet from her birth, the finger paintings from preschool, the family photos they'd removed from frames and albums throughout the house. At the bottom lay a small silver bracelet with tiny dolphins that Clara had adored. It had been a gift from Sarah for her 3rd birthday. Robert lifted it gently, the metal cool against his palm. Clara had been wearing it the day she disappeared. The police had found it 3 days later, the clasp broken, in the woods near the park where she had vanished. It was the only trace of her they ever discovered. He closed his eyes, remembering the frantic search, the police interviews, the missing posters plastered across town. He remembered Helena's screams when they'd brought her the bracelet, how she'd collapsed into his arms, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere beyond grief. When Lucas was born 3 years later, they had made their pact. Their son would never know about Clara. He would never carry the weight of a tragedy he couldn't change or understand. It had seemed the right choice then, a way to protect both Lucas and themselves from reopening wounds that had never truly healed. But now, with Helena gone, that decision felt different. The secret seemed heavier, more significant. Was he protecting Lucas, or was he simply protecting himself from having to relive the worst days of his life? Robert carefully replaced the bracelet and closed the box. Some questions didn't have easy answers, and some silences, once broken, could never be restored. The summer arrived with an intensity that matched the grief still simmering beneath Robert's skin. 3 months since Helena's funeral, and the house had settled into a new normal, quieter, emptier, but functional in its way. Lucas had finished the school year with decent grades despite everything. His teachers had been understanding, cutting him slack that Robert knew wouldn't extend into the fall semester. Life moved forward, indifferent to their loss. On a sweltering Saturday afternoon in July, Robert was clearing out Helena's home office when Lucas appeared in the doorway, hair damp from swimming at his friend's house. "Need any help?" Lucas offered, eyeing the stacks of papers and books Robert had sorted into piles. "Sure," Robert said, grateful for the company. "You can help me decide what to keep and what to donate." They worked side by side for a while, the silence comfortable between them. Lucas handled each of Helena's possessions carefully, as if they might break, or perhaps as if touching them might keep some part of her alive. "Hey, what's this?" Lucas asked eventually, pulling a folder from the back of a drawer. Robert looked up and felt a chill despite the summer heat. The folder was pale blue, unremarkable except for the small butterfly sticker in the corner, Helena's system for marking anything related to Clara. "Just some old papers," Robert said, reaching for it casually. "Probably tax stuff." Lucas handed it over, but not before glancing inside. "There's a birth certificate in there." Robert's heart hammered against his ribs. "Probably yours," he lied, tucking the folder under his arm. "Your mum kept everything." "No, it couldn't be mine." "The date was—" "Lucas," Robert interrupted, "could you grab us some water? It's getting hot in here." Lucas hesitated, clearly sensing the deflection, but nodded and left the room. As soon as he was gone, Robert opened the folder. Inside was Clara's birth certificate, a copy of the police report filed after her disappearance, and several newspaper clippings about missing children cases that Helena had collected over the years. Quickly, he slipped the documents into his pocket. He'd have to find a better hiding place for them, or perhaps it was time to dispose of them altogether. The thought made his stomach turn. Destroying Clara's records felt like erasing her a second time. When Lucas returned with 2 glasses of water, Robert had composed himself. They continued sorting through Helena's belongings, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them. Later that evening, while Lucas was watching TV in the living room, Robert retreated to his bedroom to examine the contents of the folder more closely. Among the documents was something he hadn't noticed initially, a sealed envelope with his name written in Helena's flowing script. With trembling fingers, he tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Robert, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're facing alone what we promised to bear together. The secret of our Clara. I've thought so much about whether we made the right choice in not telling Lucas about his sister. Most days, I believe we did. Why burden him with a loss he never had to feel? But there are nights when I wonder if we've denied him a part of his own history, a piece of who he is. I don't have the answer, Robert. I never did. But I want you to know that whatever you decide now, I trust you. You've always been stronger than you think. If you choose to tell him, show him the pictures in the wooden box. Let him see her smile. Tell him how she loved butterflies and hated peas. Tell him she was brave and curious and so very loved. Tell him that losing her broke our hearts, but that finding him made them beat again. And if you choose to keep our silence, know that I understand. Some pain is too heavy to share, even with those we love most. I love you always. Take care of our boy." Helena. Robert folded the letter carefully and pressed it to his chest. Tears spilled down his cheeks, silent and hot. Helena had understood his dilemma before he'd even faced it, had known that her death would force this reckoning. Downstairs, he could hear Lucas laughing at something on TV. The sound pierced Robert's grief like a shaft of light. He tucked the letter away with a deep breath. He still didn't have an answer, but Helena's words had given him something almost as valuable: permission to trust himself. August brought with it an oppressive heat that seemed to press against the windows of their home. Robert had taken time off work to spend with Lucas before school started again, and they'd fallen into a comfortable routine of late breakfasts and afternoon trips to the local pool. It was during one of these lazy mornings that Lucas, munching on cereal, looked up from his phone with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, do you ever think about having another kid? I mean, before Mum got sick?" The question caught Robert off guard, milk sloshing over the rim of his coffee cup as he set it down too quickly. "Where's that coming from?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lucas shrugged. Just thinking. Tyler's mom is having another baby, and it made me wonder if you and Mom ever wanted more kids, if I was supposed to have brothers or sisters. You do have a sister, Robert thought. The words pressed against his teeth, seeking escape. He swallowed them back. We talked about it, he said instead, but your mom's health was always a bit fragile after you were born. Another careful lie. Helena's body had recovered fine from Lucas's birth. It was her heart that had never fully healed from Clara's disappearance. Oh, Lucas said, returning to his cereal. I think I would have liked a sibling. The statement hung in the air between them, innocent, yet devastating in its irony. Later that afternoon, they drove to a nearby state park for a hike, something Helena had always loved to do with Lucas. The trails were relatively empty due to the heat, and as they climbed higher into the woods, the air cooled slightly under the canopy of trees. Mom used to say these woods reminded her of where she grew up, Lucas commented as they paused to drink water. Robert nodded. She loved it out here. What he didn't say was that Helena had stopped coming to this particular park for years after Clara disappeared. It had been too close to the one where they'd lost her, too similar in its layout. Only after Lucas turned 10 had she been able to visit again, determined not to let fear steal any more joy from her life. They continued hiking, the conversation drifting to Lucas's upcoming school year and his hopes of making the basketball team. As they rounded a bend in the trail, they came upon a small clearing where a family was having a picnic. A little girl, no more than 4 or 5, was chasing butterflies at the edge of the blanket, her laughter carrying across the space between them. Robert froze, the sight hitting him like a physical blow. The girl had auburn hair just like Clara's, just like Helena's. "Dad?" Lucas's voice seemed to come from far away. "You okay?" Robert blinked, forcing himself back to the present. "Yeah, sorry. Just got a little lightheaded from the heat." But Lucas was studying him closely. "You looked like you saw a ghost." The accuracy of the statement made Robert's throat tighten. "Let's head back," he said. "I think we've gone far enough for today." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the little girl in the clearing and about Lucas's innocent question at breakfast. It seemed the universe was conspiring to bring Clara back into their lives, to force the truth into the open. He got up and moved quietly to the closet, retrieving the wooden box once more. This time, he took it downstairs to the kitchen table and opened it fully, spreading out its contents in the dim light from the range hood. There were the photos. Clara on her first birthday, face smeared with cake. Clara with Helena at the beach, tiny hands clutching a seashell. Clara and Robert napping on the couch, her small body curled trustingly against his chest. Each image was a knife to the heart, a reminder of a happiness that had been so complete and so fleeting. He was so absorbed in the memories that he didn't hear the soft footsteps on the stairs. It wasn't until Lucas spoke that he realized he was no longer alone. "Dad, what are you doing up so late?" Robert's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving to cover the photographs. But it was too late. Lucas stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on the scattered images. "Who is that?" he asked, moving closer to the table. "That little girl with you and Mom." The moment Robert had both dreaded and somehow anticipated had arrived without warning. He felt a strange calm settle over him, as if the decision had been made without his conscious input. "Sit down, Lucas," he said softly. "There's something I need to tell you." Lucas sat across from Robert at the kitchen table, his eyes moving from the photographs to his father's face and back again. The silence between them stretched taut, like a wire ready to snap. "Her name was Clara," Robert finally said, his voice low but steady. "She was your sister." Lucas's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "My sister? I don't have a sister." "You had one," Robert corrected gently. "She was born 11 years before you. When she was 4 years old, she disappeared. We never found her." The words hung in the air, stark and irrevocable. Robert watched as Lucas processed them, his son's face a canvas of emotions, shock, confusion, hurt, and something deeper that might have been anger. Disappeared? Lucas repeated. You mean she was kidnapped? Or she died? We don't know, Robert admitted. It happened at Westlake Park. Your mother was there with Clara and Sarah, your aunt. Sarah was watching Clara on the playground while your mum stepped away to take a phone call. It was only a few minutes, but when they turned back, Clara was gone. Robert could still remember every excruciating detail of that day. The frantic search through the park, calling Clara's name until their voices gave out. The arrival of the police. The way Helena had collapsed when darkness fell, and they had to suspend the search until morning. The police investigated for months, he continued. They found her bracelet in the woods near the park a few days after she disappeared, but that was it. No other trace of her was ever found. Lucas stared at the photographs on the table, reaching out tentatively to touch one of Clara laughing on a swing. She looks like Mom, he said quietly. Yes, Robert agreed. She had Helena's eyes and her laugh. Why didn't you ever tell me? Lucas looked up, and now there was definitely anger in his gaze. All these years, and you never once mentioned I had a sister. Robert had anticipated this question, had rehearsed answers in his mind during the long nights when sleep eluded him. But now, faced with his son's hurt and confusion, all those prepared explanations seemed inadequate. After Clara disappeared, your mother and we were broken, Lucas. The grief was overwhelming. When you were born, 3 years later, we made a decision. We wanted to protect you from that pain. We didn't want you to grow up in the shadow of a tragedy. So you lied to me, Lucas said flatly. My whole life has been a lie. No, Robert shook his head firmly. Your life has been real. Our love for you has been real. We just kept a part of our past from you. We thought it was the right thing to do. Lucas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need to think. This is too much. Lucas, please. Robert reached for his son's arm, but Lucas pulled away. Did Mom want to tell me before she died? The question struck Robert like a blow. He thought of Helena's letter, of her uncertainty about their choice. She left that decision to me, he said honestly. But I think in the end, she would have wanted you to know. Lucas nodded once, then turned and walked out of the kitchen. Robert heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the quiet click of his bedroom door closing. Left alone with the scattered remnants of Clara's life, Robert felt a curious mixture of dread and relief. The secret was out now, for better or worse. He carefully gathered the photographs and returned them to the wooden box, but he didn't close the lid. For the first time in years, he felt no need to hide these memories away. The dawn was breaking when Lucas reappeared, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. He sat back down across from Robert, who had remained at the kitchen table, keeping a silent vigil. Tell me about her, Lucas said simply. I want to know everything. And so, as the morning light gradually filled the kitchen, Robert began to share the story of Clara, not just her disappearance, but her life. He told Lucas about her favorite stuffed elephant that she couldn't sleep without, about how she insisted on wearing rain boots even on sunny days, about the way she would sing made-up songs while Helena braided her hair. With each memory shared, Robert felt something shift within him, not a lessening of grief exactly, but a transformation of it. For 15 years, the pain of losing Clara had been a secret burden, carried in silence. Now in the telling, it became something different, a story that connected them rather than divided them. Do you think she might still be alive somewhere? Lucas asked when Robert finally fell silent. It was the question that had haunted Robert and Helena for years, the possibility they had gradually learned to stop considering for the sake of their own sanity. I don't know, he answered truthfully. The police believed. They thought it was unlikely after finding her bracelet in the woods. But we never knew for certain. Lucas nodded, absorbing this. I wish I could have known her. She would have loved you. Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. She always wanted a sibling. Outside, the neighborhood was coming to life. Cars starting, doors slamming, the distant laughter of children heading to summer activities. The world continued its rhythm, indifferent to the seismic shift that had occurred within their home. "I'm sorry we didn't tell you sooner," Robert said, reaching across the table to touch his son's hand. "We thought we were protecting you." Lucas was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I understand why you did it," he said finally. "But I'm glad I know now. She's part of our family. She shouldn't be forgotten." In that moment, with those simple words, Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The burden of silence, of pretending Clara had never existed, had been heavier than the grief itself. The remainder of the summer passed in a transformed atmosphere. The secret that had lived between them was now in the open, and while it didn't erase the pain of Helena's absence, it somehow made the house feel more complete, as if a missing piece had been restored. Lucas had questions, naturally. Some Robert could answer, others he couldn't. The hardest ones were about what might have happened to Clara, questions that had no answers and never would. One evening in late August, as they sat on the back porch watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Lucas asked the question Robert had been half expecting. "Do you think we could try to find her again? With all the technology now, DNA databases, social media, maybe there's a way to know what happened." Robert had considered this many times over the years. Helena had been adamantly against reopening the investigation after the initial searches proved fruitless. The pain of hoping and then having that hope crushed again had nearly destroyed her once. She couldn't bear to go through it again. "We could," Robert said carefully, "but I want you to understand something, Lucas. The odds are they're not in our favor, and searching means opening ourselves up to disappointment that can be devastating." Lucas nodded, his expression solemn. "I know, but isn't knowing better than wondering? Even if the truth is hard." The question echoed Robert's own thoughts from the night he had decided to tell Lucas about Clara. Perhaps some truths, no matter how painful, were better faced than avoided. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "It's a big decision." A few days later, as Lucas was helping Robert clean out the garage, another task that had been postponed since Helena's death, they came across a dusty cardboard box labeled "Park Case" in Helena's handwriting. "Is this about Clara?" Lucas asked, his fingers tracing the faded words. Robert nodded. "Your mother kept everything related to the investigation. Newspaper clippings, the police reports, notes from the private investigator we hired after the police search was scaled back." Lucas looked at him expectantly. "Can we open it?" For a moment Robert hesitated. Opening that box meant revisiting the darkest period of his life, the frantic searches, the false leads, the gradual soul-crushing realization that they might never find answers. But then he thought of Helena's letter, of her trust in him to make the right decision, and he thought of Lucas, who deserved to know his family's full story, even the painful chapters. "Yes," he said, "let's take it inside." They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the contents of the box. There were dozens of missing person flyers with Clara's smiling face, notebooks filled with Helena's meticulous records of every tip and sighting they'd investigated, business cards from detectives and psychics and volunteer search coordinators. At the bottom of the box was a thick folder containing the official police reports. Robert opened it hesitantly, steeling himself for the clinical language that reduced their daughter's disappearance to a case number and a series of procedural notes. "Look at this," Lucas said, pointing to a notation near the end of the file. "It says they found DNA on the bracelet that didn't match Clara's, but they never identified who it belonged to." Robert nodded. The technology wasn't as advanced then. They didn't have the databases they do now. "So if we submitted that DNA today," Lucas began. "It might match someone in the system," Robert finished, "if the sample was preserved properly." They looked at each other, the possibility hanging between them like a tangible thing. Robert felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the dangerous stirring of hope that he had learned to suppress years ago. "Dad," Lucas said quietly, "I think Mom would want us to try. One more time." Robert closed his eyes briefly, picturing Helena as she had been in those early years after Clara's disappearance, fierce in her determination to find answers, relentless in her pursuit of the truth. It was only later, after years of disappointment, that she had advocated for moving on, for protecting what remained of their family from further pain. But Lucas was right. The Helena who had filled this box with evidence, who had kept it all these years despite their pact of silence, that Helena would want them to try again, especially with new technology that hadn't existed before. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll contact the detective who handled the case. See if the evidence is still preserved, if there's anything new they can do with it." Lucas's face lit up with a cautious hope that made Robert's heart ache. He wanted to warn his son not to expect too much, not to pin his healing on finding answers that might never come. But he also understood the need to try, to exhaust every possibility before accepting the unknowable. The next day, Robert made the call. Detective Morales had retired years ago, but his successor remembered the case. The evidence, including the bracelet with its unidentified DNA, was still in storage. They would need to file paperwork to have it re-examined with current technology. "It's a long shot," the detective warned over the phone, "but we've solved colder cases than this one." As Robert hung up, he felt a curious lightness. Not hope, exactly, he was too experienced in disappointment for that, but a sense of rightness. Whatever came of this renewed search, he and Lucas were facing it together, the truth between them, at last. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with a new box, this one filled with Clara's belongings that Robert had kept in the wooden box all these years. Lucas went through each item carefully, asking questions, building a picture of the sister he had never known. "She was really into butterflies," he observed, looking at a drawing Clara had made, filled with colorful, wobbly-winged creatures. "Yes," Robert smiled at the memory. She could sit for hours watching them in the garden. Helena planted specific flowers just to attract them for her. Lucas held up a small school photo, studying Clara's smiling face. "I think I have her nose," he said thoughtfully. Robert looked from the photograph to his son's face. "You do," he agreed, surprised he hadn't noticed the resemblance before, and her stubborn chin. They continued sorting through the mementos, not trying to solve a mystery now, but simply connecting, father and son, sharing the memory of those they had lost. Outside, the summer evening deepened into night, and inside, two hearts began the slow, careful work of healing. 3 weeks later, the call came from the detective's office. The DNA from the bracelet had been run through the expanded databases. There was no match to any known offender, but there was a partial familial match to a woman in Oregon who had submitted her DNA to a genealogy website. "It's not a direct line," the detective explained, "but it suggests the DNA on the bracelet came from someone related to this woman, possibly a cousin or distant relative." It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was a thread, a place to start that they hadn't had before. That night, as Robert sat on the back porch looking at the stars, he felt Helena's presence more strongly than he had since her death. He imagined her sitting beside him, her hand in his. "We're doing the right thing, aren't we?" he asked the empty chair next to him. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of the late summer flowers Helena had planted years ago. It wasn't an answer, but somehow it was enough. Inside, he could hear Lucas on the phone with his friend, his voice animated as he described their plans to visit Oregon next month. The sound of his son's cautious optimism filled Robert with a bittersweet joy. The truth had not brought Clara back. It had not erased the years of silence or the pain of loss. But it had given them something unexpected, a shared purpose, a connection that transcended the secrets that had once divided them. Robert didn't know if they would ever find Clara or even learn what had happened to her that day in the park. But he knew now that the weight of silence had been heavier than the truth could ever be, and in that knowledge there was a kind of peace. As the stars appeared one by one in the deepening sky, Robert made a silent promise, not to Helena this time, but to himself and to Lucas. No more secrets, no more protected silences. Whatever came next, they would face it together, in the full light of truth. If you enjoyed this emotional journey through family secrets and the healing power of truth, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world and helps me continue creating these deeply human stories. Until next time, thank you for listening.